First story. Hey Reddit, I've got a story for you all. It's one of those things that seems funny now, but at the time, I was absolutely panicked. This all happened about 2 years ago when I was working late hours at my old job as a junior graphic designer. I had this habit of working until my brain was fried, and by the time I'd leave the office, it was usually close to midnight. One of those nights, I realized I hadn't eaten all day. There was a small, 24-hour supermarket about a block away from the office, so I figured I'd stop by and grab something quick. It was one of those medium-sized chains, not too big, but big enough to feel like you could get lost in it after dark. Anyway, I head inside, and it's practically deserted, which I figured was normal for that time of night. I grabbed a basket and started wandering the aisles, trying to figure out what I was in the mood for. Honestly, I was more tired than hungry, and I must have been dragging my feet because I was in there way longer than I needed to be. I remember checking my phone at one point and seeing it was already 12:30 a.m. Now, here's where things get weird. While I was browsing, I noticed there were no employees around. Not even at the registers. I figured they were probably in the back stocking shelves or taking a break. After a while, I found myself in the snack aisle, grabbed a couple of bags of chips, and headed to the front to check out. As I walked up, I realized all the lights in the store had dimmed, and the eerie quiet finally hit me. No background music, no hum of the refrigerators, just silence. I went up to the cash register, but no one was there. I stood there awkwardly for a minute, looking around, expecting someone to appear from behind the counter or the back room, but nothing. I even tried clearing my throat to make some noise, thinking someone would hear me, but still nothing. I pulled out my phone and checked the time. It was just after 1 a.m. That's when I noticed something odd. The automatic doors at the entrance were closed, and they weren't opening. I walked over, thinking maybe they were motion activated and just needed a little nudge. I waved my hand in front of them. Nothing. I tried pushing them manually, but they were locked tight. At this point, my heart started racing. I realized I was locked inside. The thought crossed my mind that maybe they shut down the store for a cleaning or maintenance break, but surely someone would have noticed me walking around. Right? I started pacing around, trying to find anyone, but the place was completely deserted. There was a small office at the back near the loading dock, and I figured if anyone was here, they'd be there. I made my way over and knocked on the door, no answer. I knocked again, louder this time. Still nothing. I was about to really freak out when I remembered I had my phone. Of course. I could just call the store's customer service line. I googled the number and dialed, but all I got was a recorded message telling me the store was closed for the night and to call back during business hours. My stomach dropped. Business hours? I thought this place was open 24/7. Panic started to set in for real. I dialed 911, but immediately felt stupid as soon as the operator picked up. What was I supposed to say? Hi, I'm stuck in a supermarket after hours? I explained the situation, and the operator was calm, saying they'd send someone to check it out. She reassured me, but I was still pacing the aisles, feeling like I was trapped in a weird nightmare. While waiting, I thought about how ridiculous the whole thing was. Here I was, locked inside a supermarket surrounded by food, and I couldn't even leave. I had this fleeting thought about just grabbing a sandwich and chilling in the break room until morning, but I didn't want to do anything that could get me into trouble. It felt like forever before I heard a knock at the front doors. 2 cops were standing outside, shining their flashlights into the store. I waved them down like I was stranded on a desert island. One of the officers gestured for me to hang tight, and a few minutes later, the manager showed up with a set of keys. Turns out, the store was under new management and they'd switched from 24/7 hours to regular operating times without updating their website or signs. The manager explained that when they did their final sweep of the store, they must have missed me because I was deep in the aisles. They apologized, but honestly, I was just relieved to be free. I walked out into the cool night air, feeling like I had just escaped from a bizarre reality TV show. So yeah, that's the story of how I spent a night accidentally locked in a supermarket. It's something I laugh about now, but let me tell you, in the moment, it was pure panic. Needless to say, I always make sure to check a store's hours now before heading in after dark. Has anything like this ever happened to anyone else? Second story. Alright, so buckle up, because this is one of those stories that still makes me cringe and laugh at the same time. This happened a couple of summers ago. I was living in a new city, having moved there for work. One weekend, I decided to go for a hike just outside of town. The trail was in this state park that was a bit out of the way, but known for its great views and quiet atmosphere. I figured it'd be a good way to clear my head after a long week. I arrived at the park in the late morning, parked my car, and started walking. The first hour or so was great, peaceful, just me and the sound of nature. But as I was making my way down a longer trail, I noticed something off in the distance. It looked like a picnic or gathering of some sort near this clearing. At first, I didn't think much of it and kept walking. As I got closer, I started to hear voices, lots of them, and I realized that this wasn't just a small group of people. There must have been at least 40 or 50 folks gathered around in lawn chairs, with a few tables set up. There were a bunch of kids running around, and I could hear a grill sizzling away in the background. Now, here's where things start to go wrong. For some reason, in my sun-addled brain, I assumed this was some kind of public park event, like a festival or community barbecue, so I thought it wouldn't be weird to just kind of join in. I didn't see any signs or anything explaining what the event was, but I figured maybe they were just inviting anyone from the park to come hang out. As I got closer, I saw a couple of people wave at me. So, of course, I waved back and kept walking toward them. One of the women, an older lady, gave me this huge smile and said, "Well, it's about time you showed up." At that moment, I froze. My brain did a quick calculation, and I realized something crucial. They weren't just waving me in because it was a public event. No, they were waving because they thought I was part of their group. Before I could say anything, this woman came up and hugged me. I'm talking full bear hug, like I was her long-lost nephew. I awkwardly patted her back, still trying to figure out how I'd wandered into this situation. "Everyone's been asking about you," she said, pulling back to look at me. "You look great." "Oh, and this must be Claire, right?" Now, not only was I apparently supposed to know these people, but I also had a fictional girlfriend in tow. I didn't even know what to say, so I just kind of stammered, no, she couldn't make it." She smiled and nodded like she understood perfectly. "Well, you're here, that's what matters. Come on, let's get you something to eat." At this point, I should have just come clean and told her I was in the wrong place. But something inside me panicked. I mean, she seemed so excited to see me, and I was already in too deep. I figured I'd just play along for a little while, grab some food, and sneak out when I had the chance. So, I followed her over to one of the tables. People started turning their heads, and a few more waved at me or nodded in my direction. I must have passed for someone they knew, because no one questioned my presence. I made small talk with the woman who greeted me, all the while trying to piece together who exactly they thought I was. Turns out, this was a massive family reunion. Like, generations deep. She started pointing out different relatives to me, giving me bits of their backstory, and I just nodded along, pretending I remembered all these people from past gatherings that I definitely hadn't been to. I grabbed a plate of food and found myself a spot near the edge of the crowd, hoping to blend in. For the next half hour, I sat there, eating barbecue ribs and potato salad while chatting with people I had never seen before in my life. It was bizarre. Everyone was incredibly friendly, asking me how I'd been, how my job was going, when I'd be getting married, because apparently, Claire and I were quite the topic of conversation. Every minute that passed made it harder to come clean. How could I just stand up and announce, "Hey, I'm not actually your cousin or nephew or whatever you think I am"? Then, just as I was considering my escape route, things got even more complicated. One of the older men, I think he was the grandfather of the group, called everyone over for a family photo. And before I knew it, I was being dragged into this massive group shot, front and center. There I was, standing in the middle of a bunch of strangers, grinning like an idiot while someone snapped photos of us. I can only imagine how confused they were later when they looked at that picture and saw a random guy standing there. After the photo, I knew I had to make my move. I politely excused myself, saying I had to get going, and thanked everyone for the food and hospitality. As I made my way back to the trail, I overheard someone say, "It was so great to see him again." He always was the quiet one. I walked away as fast as I could without breaking into a full sprint. As soon as I was out of sight, I laughed out loud at how ridiculous the whole situation was. I had just crashed someone's family reunion and played along for nearly an hour without anyone noticing. To this day, I still wonder if they ever figured it out or if they just assumed I was a distant relative they hadn't seen in years. So, Reddit, the moral of the story? Always make sure you know what kind of event you're walking into. Because you might just end up in a family photo with strangers who think you're their long-lost cousin. Has anyone else ever accidentally infiltrated a family reunion? Or am I the only one? Third story. I never considered myself much of a bowler. In fact, before all of this happened, I could probably count the number of times I'd gone bowling on one hand. But somehow, I ended up being part of a competitive bowling league for an entire year, entirely by accident. This all started about 3 years ago. At the time, I had just moved to a new city for work and didn't know anyone outside of my co-workers. I was trying to meet new people and figured I'd try different social activities around town. One evening, I was browsing through local meetup events and came across what I thought was just a casual bowling night. The description was vague but sounded fun: come hang out, bowl, and make new friends. Seemed like a perfect way to get to know people, so I signed up without giving it much thought. The event was at this retro-style bowling alley, the kind that hasn't changed its decor since the 70s. I walked in expecting a relaxed night of beer, pizza, and a few games. As soon as I entered, though, I realized something was off. First of all, everyone there seemed to know each other already, and they weren't just hanging out, they were warming up. You know, doing practice throws, stretching, even polishing their bowling balls. Some of these people had custom shoes and gloves. I don't know why, but my first instinct was, maybe this is just how serious people take bowling night here. I didn't want to stand out, so I stayed quiet and went along with it. I checked in at the front desk, and the guy working there handed me a name tag. But instead of writing my name, he handed me a pre-printed one that said, Team 7, Kyle. I was confused. I'm not Kyle, I said, laughing. He looked at me, glanced at his clipboard, and then gave me this deadpan response, "You are tonight." That should have been my second clue that something weird was going on, but I didn't want to cause a fuss. Maybe Kyle was a no-show, and they just needed someone to fill in. I could roll with that for one night. So, I head over to the lanes, and sure enough, a group of 4 people were standing around looking pretty intense. One of the guys looked over at me and said, "Kyle. Good to see you again, man. Ready to crush it tonight?" Before I could correct him, I was being handed a bowling ball and introduced to the rest of the team. They were all super friendly, and I didn't have the heart to tell them I wasn't the real Kyle. Besides, how hard could this be? I figured I'd bowl a few rounds, hang out, and then quietly disappear before anyone noticed. The first round started, and that's when I realized I was way out of my league. These people were good. They had technique, precision, and were throwing strikes like it was nothing. Meanwhile, I was lucky if I could knock down more than 2 pins at a time. Every time I got up to bowl, I could feel their eyes on me, and I'm sure they were wondering what had happened to the Kyle they knew. But here's the thing, no one seemed upset or frustrated with me. In fact, they were super encouraging, cheering me on even when I sent the ball straight into the gutter. I figured they were just being nice because I was clearly a beginner, but I also started to feel like I didn't want to let them down. So, I tried harder. I focused. And after a couple of games, I wasn't great, but I wasn't totally embarrassing myself either. After the games were done, I figured that would be the end of it. I'd thank them for the fun night, quietly explain the mix-up, and go home. But no. As we were packing up, one of the team members said, "Hey Kyle, same time next week, right?" My brain froze for a second. Next week? What had I just signed up for? It turns out I hadn't joined a casual bowling night at all. I had accidentally signed up for a full-on competitive bowling league. Not just any league, but one that met every week for an entire season. The kicker? Apparently, the real Kyle had bailed on them last minute, and they had been short a player for a while. So, when I showed up and didn't immediately deny being Kyle, they assumed I was their replacement. Now, a smarter person might have cleared things up right then and there, but me. I was already in too deep. The team had been so welcoming, and I figured, what's one more week? That one more week turned into 2, then 3, and before I knew it, I was a regular part of this league. I ended up sticking with the team for the entire season, which lasted almost a year. At first, I was pretty terrible, but over time, I actually started getting better. I bought my own pair of shoes, started learning the proper techniques, and even got my own ball. I still wasn't anywhere near as good as my teammates, but they didn't care. They were just happy to have someone reliable to fill the spot. The strangest part? No one ever called me Kyle again after that first night. It was like we had some unspoken agreement that I wasn't the original guy they were expecting, but it didn't matter anymore. I was part of the team now, and that was all that counted. By the time the season ended, I had made real friendships with these people. We'd go out for drinks after games, swap stories, and I even got invited to one of their weddings. When the season wrapped up, I finally came clean about the whole situation. I told them the truth, that I had never been Kyle, had no idea what I was signing up for that first night, and had just gone along with it because I didn't want to disappoint them. They thought it was hilarious. Apparently, they had all figured something was up after a few weeks, but decided not to say anything because they liked having me around. The real Kyle, it turns out, was kind of a flake anyway. So that's the story of how I accidentally became a semi-competent bowler and joined a competitive league for a year without ever meaning to. I'm still not sure what happened to the real Kyle, but wherever he is, I hope he knows he missed out on some seriously fun nights.